This is Gemstones and Whiskey, an Outlander podcast. I'm Ashley Alexandra.
And I'm Reena Ezra.
And this is our bonus episode for season 1.
What? Oh my goodness.
This is a very exciting episode. We are welcoming our first guest. We have Emily Rellis here with us today. She's an actor, producer, lucid body teacher, trainee, and intimacy coordinator. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Welcome to joining us.
Thanks for having me. First guest. Very exciting.
So we asked Emily to join us today specifically because of her experience and interest as an intimacy coordinator. Obviously, in terms of Jamie and Claire's relationship, that is a cornerstone for them. And the series overall depicts, obviously, a wide range of intimate scenes, both enjoyable and traumatic alike. So we asked Emily to watch specifically the wedding episode and then the last 2 episodes of the season, Wentworth Prison and To Ransom a Man's Soul, because I wanted to kind of discuss just the spectrum of intimacy, how it's depicted in the show, what's done right, maybe what could be done better, or what is the experience behind the scenes.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm very excited to dive in. I'm very much looking forward to this episode. I will just generally ask to start off, how did you feel about watching Outlander?
I wish I had more time to watch the whole show now, which maybe I will, because I was very intrigued by the episodes I did watch. I think it's very smart. I think playing with the timelines and as well as bringing in, I guess, like, speaking of the wedding episode, it's like speaking in, like, later ideals of, like, how people have sex and how people can have choice about sex versus how horses do it. You can. Which I thought is smart because it's like, that's something I'm sure, as we all learn in history all the time, you think about how people lived back then, but, like, how did people live back then? Almost in a multiple
There was
sense.
no Google.
There was no Google. There wasn't a lot of much. So, it's really smartly written. I also found that, but I definitely had to watch with subtitles. Half the time I was like, what was that?
Yes, always.
Agreed, yeah.
I have to tell you, I now watch everything with subtitles because I turned it on, like, on Netflix or whatever, specifically for Outlander, and now I'm, like, exclusively subtitles.
Yeah, the Scottish accent's hot, but you're like, what did you say?
Yes.
You're like, oh my god, I'm swooning, but
you know,
what was it exactly?
But also what?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I find the older I get, like, I appreciate accents and dialects, but, like, if I miss something, I'm thinking about what I missed for a good, like, 45 seconds, and therefore missing more.
Yes.
So I'm like, okay, wait.
I found the
there.
trick is to kind of just, like, ride the wave, and usually it's, like, I'll catch the beginning, and then I don't really know what happens in the end, and then I just wait, or in the middle, and then I just wait till the end, and usually I'm like, I think I figured it out.
Context clues.
Yeah. Hand gestures help, but yes, definitely with the show. The subtitles certainly help, and
essential. Yeah.
And it is interesting to hear phrases that they've used, thinking of the time. Just very, very interesting, and specifically in terms of intimacy and
For real.
Yeah. You kind of. I guess back then, like, you learn from just the people around you, right? Like, most people are not that traveled, so it's like, whatever the people around you are willing to share with you.
Yeah.
And that's just an interesting thought to, like, I mean, we all, I think to a certain extent that is similar today, but we do have more access to, like, outside.
Well, the difference is that, like, you're talking about maybe you have access to 2 people in a town of 20 and a stable of horses versus the internet with 8 million pieces of information available. So yes, way different.
So Emily, I would love to know how you became involved in intimacy coordination, and maybe if you could tell us a little bit more about like what that role is on a set.
Great. My, I guess, peaked interest in intimacy coordination, I can't really pinpoint it. I know it's been a big conversation in the last, like, I'd say half decade, which isn't long at all, but it's become more prominently discussed. And I think it started on stage first, actually, before it made it into film, which is great and makes sense because stage is film with 2,000 people watching,
right?
2,200, please.
Yeah.
And I guess distinctly from my own actor's perspective, I remember I was in a small show in college that it was one of the first things I auditioned for, and everybody seemed to like back away from this piece. And I didn't really understand why until like I read the sides that like this woman is like sitting on a guy's lap and like making out with his face, and she's very sexually aggressive. And I was like, oh, like I can do that. So I got it, but then I remember going through the rehearsal process feeling kind of like nervous when these things were going to come up, when I had to do them and perform them, and like wondering if like my scene partner was going to think it was okay. And then I remember distinctly how the experience from what an actor might be feeling and what a viewer sees can be so different, because there was a time when me and my co-lead were like fighting, and she was like, the sexual tension is palpable, and I'm like, is it? And she was like, yeah, we'll move into that from here. And it was, I think, just a way to want more knowledge for myself as an actress, started that journey. And I found more and more, especially for female actors, like it's empowering in a sense, because throughout your roles, you don't know what you're going to get. And the more information you can get for yourself, the safer you can be. And I appreciate that now the business is providing that, but I can't imagine how it was before. And I'm just so thankful that it is now.
Right.
Which, you know, then what does an intimacy coordinator do, right? So first of all, like, it kind of brings highlight to, like, what actually is intimacy. Like, intimacy is so much more than just sex,
right?
You know, it's like it's everything from skin to skin contact to eye contact to breath and distance between bodies. Like, breaking it down into all of those elements builds intimacy, which I actually think was like perfectly shown in the wedding episode. In that, you know, I was watching that and I thought it was so smartly choreographed, because like their first touch was just a handhold, and then there was like very intense eye contact a few times before they even touched each other. And that is like a clear, beautiful depiction of what builds intimacy and those building blocks to then get to a more physical act. So yeah, I lost my train.
No, agreed. Like, especially for the wedding episode, like, you were watching it. Just thinking about the episodes leading up, like, excuse me, they had built this emotional intimacy in the episodes leading up, where they kind of relied on each other and opened up to each other in a way that they either couldn't or wouldn't do with other people for one reason or another. So they had this base to start with, but like definitely never crossed the line to anything else, and they would dance like somewhat close to the line leading up to it, and like as delicately as possible. So then the wedding episode was just this like condensed timeline of like just speeding it up, you know?
That was literally the climax.
And they did this like beautiful choreography overall, just with the pacing of the episode of like teasing it, right? Like leading up to it, shying away, then going for it, then having like a lull and a reset, and then going back.
Round two,
I thought it was interesting that the whole episode overall felt like an intimate scene.
Yeah, in all the different ways.
Yeah.
And that's something as well that it's just like a well-written, well-produced show, the intimacy serves the story. It's not just put in there for an audience grab, for viewers, you know, and I think that's, for me, the difference is that, like, it's the same thing as a really, like, violent moment or a giant dance break. Is this justified? Does this serve the story? If it doesn't, maybe we reconsider why this is in there. And that's, like, one of the first building blocks you bring to the coordination of it all. Is, like, you break it down, like, via the characters, via the story as a whole. What is this serving? What are we all get on the same page? Production, actors, everybody's on the same page as to, like, this is an act to serve the story. That is why it's here. And especially, like, any actor knows, myself included, you're reading breakdowns and, like, they put in nudity that's just, like, unjustified, pass. Like, that's not what we're going for. And if people are trying to put that in there, it's not going to come off. It doesn't relate to the viewer. Because it's lazy producing in that you're just trying to get a reaction instead of to actually bring the audience on a journey with you.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point of making a
What
series.
are those early conversations like in pre-production, I guess? Is it conversations with director, writer? Do you have any, like, clout, I guess, in terms of, like really, I don't know what experiences you've been in, but, like, if something stands out to you as, like, not necessary, I guess.
Sure.
Do you present that to them?
Well, I mean, to whatever access you're given, you know, you're not sure. Hopefully you're brought in as early as possible.
Yeah.
You know, that's everybody's dream. And to have a discussion first with the writer, if possible, you know, if they're alive, if they're available, and the director, as well as the talent. Yeah, so we're all on the same page. But again, I think the first thing said is, like, let's look at the story here. Like, this is being put into this story. Why? What is your character doing? What is your character doing? What happens before and what happens after? Just like any script analysis, it is part of the story. And in that same sense, it needs to be treated as a technical part of the story. You don't get your actors in a room and be like, okay, this is when oh God, I'm going to make a Shakespeare reference and mess it up, but Malvolio, like, dies and someone stabs him, right? So, like, do it, go. And, like, you have to break your neck and you have to backflip, like, do it.
Yeah.
You don't do that. Or, you know, we need a big jig here, so go. Like, no one does that to their actors. So in the same sense, getting two people in a room being like, okay, here's the sex scene, like, just go for it. Here's the thing, you might trust your actors, everybody's an adult, hopefully with a healthy, non-traumatic sexual past, and maybe your first rehearsal goes well, and you're like, great, they did it. What if the next rehearsal they can't stop laughing? What if the next rehearsal it's weird?
Yeah.
What if the next rehearsal they're both in tears? When you break it down into choreography, that is something you can hold on to. It is physical blocking. There is technical elements that build the scene that a viewer sees. And that's how you can ground it in both, like, the theater, film technicals and keep the actors safe. Because it's not putting themselves in the situation as you would without these tactics at play.
Right. It's preparation. Preparation is very, very important. And also, you're saying, as far as, like, you know, the actors, you can't assume. You don't know what their exposure to this, whatever it is. And I'm sure people are vulnerable. Like, you know, it's not... That's also your job, the work you put in provides a level of comfort, wouldn't you say? Like, do you have people who really, they trust you? Yeah. Like, they are... Did you have it? You don't have to, like, say any specifics, but if people came with you with hesitations or with concerns or with issues about anything, how do you handle that?
Well, so that's, like, step 2, if you will. So we're going really naturally through the motions here. So before anything is even begun in the choreography process, we go through boundaries. and everybody's boundaries are perfect as they are. And, you know, however many people are involved, everybody identifies their boundaries, where they are today. The group sees, they then get to trace over the same boundaries, and it is clearly communicated via every cast member what the boundaries are, where fences are over physical body parts, certain areas, certain degrees of touch. There are 3 types of touch you can use. There's skin touch, which is nice and light. There's muscle touch, which is a bit heavier. And then there's bone touch. Defining every movement and weight, degree, speed helps people understand it more, and it keeps everybody safe. Because it's the same thing as that, like, if you spend 6 weeks blocking out a dance, and then all of a sudden your partner decides to add in an 8 count of themselves, someone can get hurt. Right. Not only will it look weird, you could get hurt, you know? Yeah. So this is a way, talking about boundaries, having your physical instrument, which is the actor's job, is bringing your body to the piece. You have to keep safety the top priority. And by bringing your own personal consent, giving that consent, allowing people to see it and repeat it back to you, sets the tone for the environment that this is serious work. This is not something to take lightly or brush off. And I think it gives a sense of allowance to also bring themselves to it fully.
That's so interesting just to hear you talk about different types of touch. And like, I've learned more just from like however long we've been talking right now. I've had like multiple intimate moments, let's say, in productions that I've done before, like kiss scenes or whatever, nothing too serious. But it's like, I almost felt like in those productions it was something that was not talked about. Like, it was actively avoided because there was a sense that like everyone's always a little awkward about it, and like, let's not talk about it too much and let's just do it. And it's like the complete opposite of what it should be.
Because not talking about it kind of gives the thing a power.
Absolutely.
Where it's now it's more daunting.
And also it is like a dance, right? There are different colors and textures to what you're conveying, and there are different ways to achieve that. And so like, to actually be directed in terms of like, how much pressure are you using? And it's just so interesting that it's not always directed the way other parts of scenes are directed or handled.
Sure.
You know?
Well, I think to that sense, it's not talking about it, it's how you talk about it.
Correct.
You know, it's like, if you're constantly going to refer it as the sex scene,
right,
where one of us gets groped and the other gets humped, of course everybody's going to be nervous. Who wants to do that? I mean, sure, we're actors, we're vulnerable, we like to play, but like, in that sense, we're vulnerable. We like to play. We don't always want to just have our bare naked soul on the stage without protection. Don't call it the sex scene. Call it Act 2, Scene 5.
Yeah.
If they walk in with coffee cups, call it the coffee scene.
Right.
You know, and if someone is getting groped, it's maybe like, he gropes her. No, he possibly touches her with a muscle level touch on a space that her body that she has allowed him.
Right.
No one's humping. They are opening and closing distance with their pelvises.
It's like wild that just changing the language
It
automatically shifts
your focus.
Yeah.
It automatically shifts your focus. It relieves the pressure.
Yeah.
It makes it a physical act that you can follow step by step. I've got my A, B, C, all these things I can follow, that the thought of possibly, you know, is someone looking at, is this weird? No, I'm following the choreography that I consented to, I had part in making, and was directed by the team.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very collaborative process.
Yeah.
Selectively collaborative as well. You know, it's not, I don't think we'll ever get to a space where like, it's like any other set day, you know, like the sound guy can walk through, get to crafty. Like, these are still smaller rehearsals, smaller, only who needs to be there, intimate productions for intimacy, which makes sense. But it is It is. Collaboration is the best thing that comes to mind for me, in that the same sense is like, I go in with a plan, of course. Like, I read the script or I read the breakdown, whatever, and I have ideas. But it always comes down to that first meeting when we talk about the characters, we talk about the story, and we go through boundaries. My plan could go straight out the window. I coordinated for a play right before the pandemic. It was the final project I did. Closed 1 week before the world closed.
Oh, gosh.
And I remember reading the play and being asked to come on. And there was an intimate act between two main characters. And I was like, okay, like, I've got my ideas down, exactly how we'll do this. And, you know, I get to set first day. And just from where the boundaries were for both actors, wasn't going to happen. So I was like, okay, no big deal. We can work with what we have. And in that, both of the actors were in such a place that they didn't want to really touch at all. And I'm like, interesting. And I ran it by the creative team, who was very generously open to it. And we worked from there that day. It wasn't the choreography that stuck and made it to the performance, but what I think people don't realize is how much can be told through how bodies move through space.
Right.
You know, if someone pursues someone and the other either is receptive or not, that changes what the audience sees. If someone grabs a wrist and grabs back, that is different if someone grabs a wrist and, you know, places a kiss on it. You know, it's all of these small, minute things that can still tell the relationship between two characters that gets overlooked.
I think that's so much of what the wedding episode is, because the actual, like, sexual interactions are relatively brief in the grand scheme of, like, that full episode, but there are so many of those little moments. I'm thinking, like, it just made me think about when he goes to, like, brush her neck or something.
I was just thinking
and
that.
she kind of, like, recoils a little bit. And so he takes that note, steps away, right? He doesn't disengage necessarily or shut off or anything like that. He gives her space. And she recognizes that it was, you know, in that moment, I think she was thinking about her husband, her first husband.
Poor Frank.
And how, you know, she's just slept with this new man that she's now married to. And I think that was her body's reaction in that moment. And then she, like, looked at him and just said, like, sorry. And he kind of just acknowledged her comment and moved on. And, like, that conveyed so much in that small exchange. And it's very interesting how powerful something that small can be.
Absolutely. And how the story would have been different if after, because I remember that part too, that was on my list of things, because I agree, that whole episode I thought was choreographed beautifully. And that exact thing is, that is what I try to teach the actors even before we get to the actual scene work, is pushing and pulling through space, like how their bodies react if someone touches your neck and you dismiss it. And then the person who gets dismissed, how do you react? And then how do you react to their reaction? It is a constant wave. Yeah. And how that scene would have been different if after he touched her neck, what if she touched his hand?
Right.
How different that would have gone from there. Yeah. You know? And again, they hadn't even kissed yet. Right. They were still clothed. Yeah. And it gets overlooked how much you can build. And as an audience member, how invested you get, because the story only gets deeper and deeper and deeper.
And that short little interaction that if you weren't fully paying attention to the screen at the time, you would have missed, right? Like, it was nothing big. It told me so much and set up so much about their relationship that would hold true throughout the entire series. Yeah. Like, they're on 5 seasons going on 6. And, like, that you saw, it was a representation of their listening to each other. They care about each other, and they find ways to communicate with one another, all in a 3-second.
It is so subtle.
Series of events that literally, if you had blinked or if you were checking your phone, you would have missed. Totally. And I think that's so So wild.
Yeah. And you can keep that same choreography, right? You know, it's like you start, he takes 2 step forwards, he does a light skin touch on her neck, she possibly recoils, and he steps away. You can keep that same thing, but if he steps away and huffs and puffs and doesn't look at her and her sorry isn't gentle and filled, that completely changes the story, completely changes their character. But it's the same choreography. It can be done by that in 2 stories and tell the story, but as they need it to be. Yeah. You know?
It makes me think about how often we do that in real life, right? Like our bodies tell the story, and there are people who can read it, and there are people who struggle, and it's just not something that they're attuned to. And it's incredible to think about how the messages that we're relaying and the percentage of messages that we're relaying with our bodies, how we interact with other people.
Well, I think, to counter you, I think now more than ever, people are so aware of it.
Because of
the pandemic.
Yeah.
Myself included, you know, it's like there is a new level to your body in space that everybody has that I've never seen in myself and the people I interact with. There's like, the air becomes almost thicker now when you're in a certain group of people because you're unsure of what to do.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a bad thing. I really don't. I don't think it's a bad thing that you have this hyper awareness because it only makes me realize how many situations I didn't even account for it beforehand because it wasn't a global possible threat on my life or the people I've interacted with.
Right.
Because it holds weight. But in that same sense, this part of scene direction, it holds weight. It always holds weight. Every part of the scene holds weight. And that's what I think is becoming more mainstream is that, you know, actors put their whole bodies into shows and films because there's no other option. So how can we keep them safe and whole so when they leave the show and go on to another project, there isn't this period of like whole shutdown, you know, or turning to substances or any other negative effect because when you're trying to do your job, it costs you way more than you signed up for. And that's what we're trying to eliminate, I hope, in the industry, which is like a long time coming.
Yeah.
Thank you. But
I mean, bottom line, it can be taught.
Yeah.
People can learn it. People can adjust. People can adapt.
Exactly.
And it's just, people are tired of the old ways. It's not, like you said, it's a long time coming. It's done. It's over. Like, this should not, people don't need to be this fearful and concerned of their physical, you know, space with somebody else or how they, because also that translates to mentally, psychologically, emotionally, like what you're taking from that. Now, how do you feel and what you're worried about in your next project? You know, every single thing is an experience.
Yes, it absolutely is. And it's, you know, again, your body's a living, breathing, changing thing. And it's, whether you're an actor or not, just so you're talking about, like, you take your experiences with you. You know, when you leave a job or you leave a school and you go into a different environment, certain things come up and can affect you in ways that either you consciously or unconsciously experienced beforehand. And then what are you going to do? So it's setting yourself up as a production as a whole for success. Not only to provide safety for your actors, but for your film as a whole and your company as a whole. It's better is better is the slogan that of shout out to Theatrical Intimacy Education, which is how I've learned this. There's a great book called Staging Sex by Chelsea Pace, which is like my Bible. That's what I've been using, and she leads a lot of workshops. But that's their slogan, is that better is better. You know, it's like you can do this. Taking some of these principles and putting them into action is way better than not. You know?
Absolutely.
Way better.
Yes.
I'm curious. I mean, obviously, so Reena and I just last week recorded the last 2 episodes, and we had been, I think, like, dreading it a little bit throughout the whole
I had
process.
to take a shower after.
Leading up to it. It's just not fun to watch it, right? Especially, I think, as actors, we all probably skew a little more towards empaths and, you know, you get invested in these characters and it's tough to watch them go through traumatic experiences. And I guess I always consider it from the actor perspective as well, like thinking about showing up on those days or that day or whatever to film a scene that you know is going to be, you just know it's going to be a long and trying day. And I guess, is there any recommendations that you could give to actors who are showing up for a scene like that, or how to get through that as safely as possible, just for your own mental health, I guess?
I mean, I have to think that any scene like that, like, there is choreography built in.
Yeah.
I was looking for it, and I could see certain parts of it, and it's just like it's all like how many counts of movement versus how many breaths are taking. Like, all of these things add up. You stick to the choreography.
Right.
You can trust in the choreography. The choreography lasts. That is the arc that is built, and a reminder that this is a character and you are going through that process. And, you know, I would have to hope that any intimacy coordinator, like, you bring as many elements to keep the body safe as possible. So, you know, scenes like that where they're naked a lot, like, you have warming pads, you've got robes, you've got blankets. It's not like they're laying there carelessly waiting and waiting and waiting.
Yeah.
No, it's like, if there's a cut, bring blankets, you bring warmers. If you need to take a step away, having patience with it, making sure that is known also to the crew, as well as, you know, there's genital coverings always, literally called cock socks, and patches for the ladies. So you provide as much as you can for the actor, especially, and checking in, like, is everything okay now? Boundaries are going okay before things start, and checking in throughout rehearsal and through shooting without stepping over their boundaries as well. Everything you build, from choreography to coaching on set, is on the sidelines, because these actors, they go through their boundaries, they go through their choreography. Nothing is worse than being like, let me show you how to do it.
Right.
That completely disregards everything that they've built together. So you trust your actors. You know that they're going to keep each other safe because you've been there through the build. So when the day comes, you can trust in the choreography. And just, I think Reena said something before, it's just like, everybody knows that the most effective actor for an audience is one that's relaxed. And the more you can provide that relax, that the choreography is there, I know exactly what I'm doing, exactly what is happening, exactly on the counts. Everything is even counted out on counts of 8. You can just kind of let go in that sense, you know?
I've said this during the watch-along episodes. I struggled a lot with the rape and abuse that was depicted in the last 2 episodes, and so much so that I reflected upon it afterwards. And part of it, I think, is that it was man on man, and it's not something that I had seen represented a lot. And I said, okay, but what else? Like, that isn't just the only source of how I'm feeling. Like, I just felt like it was so traumatic to watch those episodes, and I realized I hadn't often thought about the psychological effects of rape from the male perspective. I'm a woman. I think I've grown up thinking about rape as a woman, from the perspective of a woman, and it's depicted a lot more often in most media. And so I think there's a level of, I want to say desensitizing, but it might also just be familiarity and, like, acceptance of the circumstances, from having time to think about it and digest it. And now there's a new version offered up that I had to digest, and I just thought that was really interesting. And I don't always agree with rape being a plot point.
Okay.
So there were parts that I felt were a little gratuitous and unnecessary. I know we talked specifically about the last episode, Reena and I, about the power of, like, suggestion and maybe not needing to very clearly and realistically, like,
put it on display.
Depict all elements of that scenario. I guess I would just be interested to hear your perspective on watching those last 2 episodes and any thoughts that came up about what was shown, how it was shown. I do, again, just want to say I respect the show for showing a perspective that is not normally focused on.
Yes.
And so totally respect that. I just felt like, in general, regardless of who was involved in the abuse, I think they could have scaled back a little bit.
Okay. Well, I mean, I watched 15 first, and the way, prison?
Wentworth Prison.
I watched Wentworth Prison first, and, you know, we only really saw very light contact, you know, more palpable intimacy in distance and space, in degrees of touch. And I was like, wow, okay. That's still told the power dynamic. Because that's another thing, is that at the core of intimacy and how it serves the story, intimacy can be put in for love. It can be put in for connection. It can be put in for power. It can be put in for vengeance. That, just like anything else, there is a reason behind it, and identifying that's what always comes first. And, you know, I could see pretty clearly at the Wentworth prison, I was like, okay, I can see the power dynamic. And so when a lot more of it was coming in for 16, I hear what you're saying, in that it was hard to watch, because in how I take that is because, as someone who cares for Jamie, it was really hard to see him go through something really traumatic.
Yes.
But for me, watching it, I watched it twice, because I had to make sure I was correct, in that all of those were also shown because it was clearly depicting Randall's relationship to power, and his own relationship to intimacy, and how he connects, and especially how he was trying to connect to Jamie in multiple ways. So I can totally understand, and maybe that's what they, you know, these things are talked about in the writer's room, that I'm sure people will be like, people are going to switch it, but it's just like, for Randall, for that fullness of his arc, there are multiple levels that come in. How possibly he, you know, I hate talking about it from the sexual language of the viewer, but for him to climax, like, he needs a degree of violence, and for the power shift to be there. And then you see that his possible gender identity is brought in as well, when he brings in the lavender oil. So for me, it was pretty clear as to why each scene was included on multiple levels from both of the character arcs, but it doesn't disclude at all that this is the risk in making art as a whole. You don't know what your audiences are coming in with, and you don't know what they're going to leave with.
Right.
But that's the whole reason you make it, is to affect change.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that is what every creator risks at the top.
I mean, I'm happy to hear your perspective too, like, to see that you saw purpose in each different point of it.
Yeah,
because there were a lot of layers there.
So
it was
many
a
layers.
lot of focus on, and I do really like how you mentioned the power dynamic, and specifically Randall. Like, this is because we were like, it's very, like, total opposite sides of the coin. At some similarities, but obviously major differences. I mean, we were just talking about intimacy, but with the wedding and episode 15 and 16, right? Where we're having also very, like, a female dominance at times with the wedding, and you have I know Ashley, we'll get to it sooner, a little bit later, about like it being the perspective from the female gaze, and then having it totally from male's perspective, where I don't know, like to me it felt like episode 15 and a lot of episode 16. It was Randall's. Like, this belonged to him. Like, this was his... I mean, like, episode 16, a huge part was also Jamie's recovery and the aftermath of it. And, again, how that affected Claire's and Jamie's relationship.
Yep.
Because that is the entire show, basically.
Right.
These characters,
Yeah.
But Randall has such a huge... I never like dismissing Randall completely. Because he does feel like such a main character.
Oh my
For
goodness,
season
yes.
1, it's just so intense. Like,
he is,
and he's just a very different being. Then he's a different makeup than the other two,
I'm going to be honest with you. It was actually like, yes, violent and sexual, but it was seeing all of the colors that were coming out in Randall's character in 16 that made me be like, I gotta go watch the show. No, really, because I was like, if they're gonna put all of this in this penultimate episode, what has he been like before?
So I've said this on the podcast, and I also, Emily, I know you and I chatted a little bit on our drive over here. Like, I felt, and I think this is part of why I felt the way I did after watching the last 2 episodes of the season, I felt a little betrayed by the show, because I felt like they had set parameters throughout this season that would bring things up to a certain point. I'd say nowhere near the last 2 episodes, but would bring things up to a point of danger, and then everything would be okay, right? It would turn out okay in one way or another. There were no really big, traumatic, scary events. Well, I guess some threatening events, but not to this extent. So for me as a viewer, I just felt like I thought I knew where the boundaries were. Mm-hmm. And these 2 episodes completely shattered those. Mm-hmm. And I was not prepared. And so I felt like my trust was betrayed by the show. And, like, I mean, also I had COVID, so maybe I had, like, dramatic brain fog or whatever. But that was the first time I ever really felt that. I think usually shows do a great job, or great shows, which I do think the writing of the show was so much better than I ever thought it would be when I started it. Mm-hmm. The plots are good. I'm invested in them. But I just feel like they do a better job at establishing their brand in the beginning and sticking with that. And so you can get comfortable, even if it is uncomfortable. You understand what is possible in that universe. And this just completely blew past it. But it is also their longest season, right? Season 2 isn't as long, I don't think. And it was kind of 2 half seasons, essentially.
I saw that. Yeah.
So
part 1, part
they
2.
did up to when Claire ended up was it in Wentworth? Where did she end up with? No, it wasn't Wentworth. With
I'm checking.
Double
checking, just as I want to.
Jack Black.
Yeah, I know.
Black the other one on the ocean, and Jamie came in and saved her with a
but that was a
gun.
different location.
But like that was the end of the first half of the season, essentially, and then they came back with the second set of episodes. So I don't know. There's not really a question there.
I mean,
I'm just rambling, but I just was interesting. Like and I don't feel like the series did that again.
Yeah.
In the seasons afterwards. But I guess really, because how much further could they have gone?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's more a development question, which makes me intrigued because it's, as I think, which I appreciate the more that I feel like maybe 10 years ago, if a show was good and it was successful, that's all people concentrated on. And it's like, great, thanks for the entertainment. But nowadays, people want to know about the development. They want to know where this idea came from, how long it took. And especially with television, it's very interesting because you could have shows, which I'm not going to have the references I wish I had, but you could have shows that maybe the writer has Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm,
he had it planned out from the very top. Even though the books weren't written, he knew exactly how he wanted it to end. And then you've got other shows like, most network dramedies, comedies, sitcoms, that the lines are changing hours before camera rolls. So the characters are living, breathing in the atmosphere on that set. It could change by the day, by the hour, by the millisecond.
Right.
So with this one, I don't know. It would be something worth checking out. I know for sure. I don't know. I could see the betrayal, but just because, especially how informed it left me, both with Randall and Jamie, because this is an event that will inform the rest of both of their stories and their characters going through this universe.
Well, you got some catching up to do.
I just want to interject. Yes, season 1 is the longest season.
Yes.
I think the shortest season has been. The shortest season has been like up to episode 12, which is going to be interesting for when season 6 comes, because obviously the pandemic probably forced it to be much shorter. Yeah. But that fuels a lot more because they, with not even finished filming season 6, they were already renewed for season 7.
There you go.
So enough episodes for there. And yes, when Jamie saved Claire, she was at Fort William.
Fort William.
That was, I was just trying to rack my brain. I was like, what's the name? So I had to look it up. Fort William, different location than Wentworth Prison. But also, very similar thing where they have, like, you are trapped here. You're captivated. This is by the water on an island separate on its own. You're like, nobody's around. No one's going to save you. Right. That was also the very eerie thing where, when Randall had Jamie all to himself. Like, it's just like, you can't go anywhere. Yeah. You are my puppet. You were my, and like, him like, it just, emotionally, which we've already broken it down just from our perspectives, but how he enjoyed it and seemed to like it was kind of romantic for him, like for Randall. Like he was coming from a place of weird sick, but love, like weird sick, like Yeah.
Well, I mean, you think of it from the character's perspective, that it's just like no actor who's playing Randall thinks it's sick or violent. Like, that is how they express love. That's how they're trying to gain, maybe not love, if power or sexual energy. Yeah. But that's no one who, it's easy to watch a movie and be like, oh, so-and-so's a psycho. The actor does not go in like, I'm playing a psycho today. Like, that is the kind of acting that pops out on the screen like a cartoon character. You're like, what is happening? Yeah. That is not the perspective, but that just goes to show how much you ground it in these unsexual terms, unsexual things for these actors to grasp onto, and they can put their character's journey into them.
Right. Right? Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. How did you feel though about the torture? Like you did did you feel like a lot of it they used as shock value, or I guess it is still justified that like, no, this is Randall's process?
The torture in like with the hands.
When he nailed his hand to the table. And things not sexual, I mean. When things were... Which is weird, because again, I'm thinking of Randall, and I'm like, people do are sexually satisfied when they inflict pain upon others in whatever form that means.
I was even more creeped out when he was like nurturing to Jamie.
Oh my god, that was worse. Question, no, totally agree. No, that was another level. Worse. Yeah. Yes.
Well, thinking about it from, a character's perspective, like I'm sure you could probably think about it from like, oh, why did he have to nail his broken hand to the table? Well, what did we learn in a few seasons before when he asked to see his back? He ripped the shirt, and then all of a sudden he turned on him.
Right.
He says it even before. He's like, can I get a little bit of insurance or something, what the line is. Nailing his hand to a table is a lot of insurance, bud. Especially when he's offering the one thing Randall has been wanting the whole time.
Right.
I think it's an extreme move, but these are extreme stakes. That's why. So it didn't pop out to me as gratuitous. I'm trying to think of a good example of something gratuitous, because, like, I'm not saying that they put proper trigger warnings on these episodes that were well earned and should be there the whole time, but to me, it really served, and like I haven't watched the whole series, but looking at from what I could gather from these characters, it served.
No, I
the
think
story.
that speaks volumes.
Absolutely.
To like have only watched those episodes and still feel like, nope, seems valid.
Seems valid, and it made me actually want to go back and be like, ooh, because another term and thing to look out for in very well crafted writing is that no character starts and ends the same. Very rarely, without major transformation in between. And it's an interesting way to think of it, is like, oh, if this is where this ends, where does this start, and how do we get there?
Yeah.
Because there's many a clue at the end being like, wow, is this something to look out for? Maybe you go back and look for it, that there are things in episode 16 that might show up throughout the whole rest that you didn't see until you would have seen the end.
Yeah.
They were very clever about when and how much, like when they gave you information about Randall and how much.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go back and watch season 1.
And I would say what's really interesting is, as of right now, like end of season 1, we didn't really get the answers we were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, I feel like what they did throughout this season was show us glimpses of him that would help the end make sense.
Hey,
like,
you mean Randall?
Yes, sorry. So it would prepare us for, obviously, something bad involving him to happen at the end.
Yeah.
But we're still, after episode 16, like, we don't quite have an understanding or an explanation as to why he was the way he was. And so, yeah, so we'll have to see if that's ever...
His character is very intricate.
...covered.
Yeah,
I think he's very similar to a Ramsay Bolton.
Yes.
Yeah.
From
Yeah,
Game
you
of
compared that
Thrones,
earlier in our podcast.
but
Yes, yeah.
I almost think he's worse, like in terms of his level of manipulation, because he holds a high rank. He is a soldier. He leads people. Does he always lead them well? Not necessarily, but he does a job. He knows when he can and cannot let that part of him out. Whereas Ramsay Bolton is pretty much just always that person. So I think they're both monsters, but I think at least with Ramsay Bolton, you know what you're getting. With Jack Randall, you don't really know. And even Claire, this is not an episode you had seen, but even Claire was trying for a while to see humanity in him and like play to humanity, and he let her play that game, danced with her, right, in that fantasy or whatever, and then very promptly shut that down. It was like, you think you know me, you think you can play me, you think I care, and he's like, I do not, I'm a monster. Like, that is, to me...
But is he a monster?
Well, he's got problems, let's say that.
Dude, we have discussed this, where we are trying to put ourselves in Randall's shoes and think about, like, ooh, I have this thing that I didn't choose this way of life. I'm not talking about his profession. I'm talking about his sexuality. His I'm not even talking about...
Desires.
Yes, thank you. I'm not even with, not about like him inflicting pain or anything evil or whatever, just purely that, like, that what are we talking about? 1700s? It's the early 1700s. That time period where it just does feel like Randall. I mean, trying to be like does he feel trapped? Does he feel like
by
he
his
can't
own identity?
be his identity?
It is
exactly.
his identity.
He can't
I
be
know where you're
who
going.
he is. He can't be like. Yeah, it's just a completely different time period. He's not 2021.
Of course. Well, exactly what you're saying. It's like, because I'm not trying to dissuade your, but it's, you can look, it's literally doing this work. I'm not going to lie. That informs me both as an actor, but as a storyteller, it's just like, monster is a subjective term.
Of course.
But in the same sense that, like, you're not invited to my house, like, you know, but it is so interesting that exactly what you were saying, your identity is what you were born with, exactly that, and here he is in 1700s, and this is how he has survived to this very moment.
Right.
And these are the ways in which he was able to get himself a job and survive in the world and get up every day, and this is how it manifests. And
he looks like he holds so much pain, though.
Yeah.
It does, like, how, you know, if he's internalizing that for years and how long, what is that going to do to a person?
Right.
You know, and people do have, every person's different. People are going to become people can be given the same set of circumstances, but neurologically people are going to have a different path, or they are going to become someone different.
Well, it's so interesting too, because I feel like people could watch a character like that and be like, oh, it must be so fun to be so evil. It's got to be so easy just to strut around. It's just like, if you really look at it, you got to think like, that is a heavy character.
Yeah.
Those are heavy circumstances to explore and to really dive deep in with an open heart and open mind to take on as an actor.
Yeah,
you know?
Sure.
It just makes me look at it completely differently. Like, I'm gay myself, and I tell my mom all the time, she's like, I would have been a witch. They would have roasted my ass. Like, there's no possible way. You would pop me down even in, like, the 60s, I would have been on a street corner. And it's sick to kind of think about it in that sense, which, you know, is scary in that sense, because it once the older you get, and hopefully the more open-minded you get, which is not how a lot of people move through the world, it makes you really kind of look back and think differently. It's like, wow, but what does that really mean, or what did it mean in that same context?
Also, you become quite calculated. Randall was quite calculated what he was doing, and like you said, I think it comes down to survival.
Well, the same way he has this idea of himself as being a man of his word, right? Like, when it's convenient to him, obviously he'll offer that, right? Well, no, I'm a man of my word, and it does mean something to him, and he does, from the short sample that we have, he will follow through on those things. I think he does intend to really follow through on those things, and it's just interesting that, like, that helps him rationalize, I think, what he does.
Yes. Yeah.
He's
very interesting.
I know. That's awesome.
And back to what you're saying about, like, actors taking on a character like that, I think especially when it isn't obvious why.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can, as an actor, you can rationalize it if it goes, no, well, it's very clear. Like, this trauma caused this character to, whatever, behave this way, and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, you can kind of be like, oh, good, everyone understands, right? Like, you know? But to tackle this character where we're all left being like, I still don't really understand what that guy's deal is. Like, why? Like, where did it start? Or, you know, you always want more of the story. So it's interesting to have.
And sometimes you just have to settle with what you get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're just like, all right, if I'm not finding out right now. Okay.
Right. But to the both points, you want more of the story, and this is what you get. That was the season finale.
You're right.
They did it exactly
It was acted well. You're right. You're right.
I know.
So I know you haven't seen all of season 1 yet, but Ashley was like phrasing things beautifully in previous recordings of our podcast about the female gaze.
Yeah.
And about this show as like, you know, the viewers who are watching it, who is, you know, just how they, I guess, the elegance of the show and what they, throughout, you know, many different seasons, but like your main character is Claire. Main, I'll say main.
Yeah, no,
character,
absolutely.
right? But
It is Claire.
It's
Yes.
her point of view. It's her.
She's the narrator.
Yes,
She's the main.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but her also, I mean, her not being the show, finally, you're not having a damsel in distress. You're having somebody who's intelligent, somebody who is confident, somebody who is stubborn, and sometimes these characteristics get her in trouble.
Absolutely. A witch.
Because yes, exactly. Because she's also going back into a time period, which is, like, again, it's very fascinating to me because it's just like the how women are treated, the 1700s, and still she's only from the 1940s.
Right, yes.
You know, we're not really talking about super modern freedom for women.
Yeah, that would be dated to us.
It's very interesting to say, like, she's a modern woman, and you're like, wait a second.
From the 40s.
Yeah, you're like, oh, right.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, this show definitely, I think, especially when we're talking about something like the wedding episode, from the female gaze, there's moments, again, I think, stereotypically, right, and also scientifically, women, intimacy is more than just physical touch.
Yes.
Specifically for women. And I think this show really understands that.
Absolutely.
And I think, like you're talking about, just the different techniques to convey this story, and intimacy being more than just touch and contact. I think this show has so many examples of that.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, like, first thing that does come to mind is, like, in the wedding scene when, which we were laughing about because Ashley's like, that's totally something I would do, when they were about to go in for their kiss. And then she's like, tell me about your family.
Yeah, because, I mean, think about it in that same situation. It's like you can feel it building, and that's a completely normal human response. Not even normal human response, something you can relate to. I would think every audience member, because we've all know that feeling of vulnerability. It's too much, I'm not ready. Boom, let me change direction. And I think that was wonderfully conveyed through that, you know. I don't like how I use the word normal, but standard. I don't know. But as far as the female gaze and the male gaze, I'm so intrigued by that because I don't know if they're directly separate. Like, I would classify that as adding the female gaze. Like, you don't have to take the males out.
Right.
We're here.
Well, there's
like,
also the idea that, like, the female gaze is actually the universal gaze.
I will agree with that.
Like, male is for male, and then the female gaze is something everyone appreciates.
I mean, I'm down with that. That's the first time I've heard it, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Because I think it's adding in all of the additional layers to exactly what you said. But I think the male gaze gets termed so much with, like, antiquated porn comes to mind for me. You know, it's like, it's the physical acts of penetration, the same interesting disembodied sounds, and it's physical for the sake of physical. Right. And the female gaze adds in the why. Yeah. It does. Yeah. It adds in the why as well as all of these layers of how. And that is what you kind of bring in to the coordination of it. It's like you desexualize it as much as possible and you keep the bodies active. You know, it's like, I remember I myself have a loose shoulder. So any movement activities I do, you know, it's someone who I make sure I say it. It's like, don't pull hard because it'll pop out. And that's something, if it's not honored, I can't be fully relaxed in the space. And again, something we've talked about multiple times, you don't know the bodies that are coming into space. You have to let them be seen and to be heard. So if, say I'm going to touch your shoulder, it's be like, And then, like, does that feel good for you? And then if I put my hand here, does that feel good for you? Constantly checking in and being assured your actors' bodies are trained and prepared. They're like litmus paper, that you will see the reaction. They'll be able to communicate it. And you build off that. And so why these human moments make it to the screen is because I think they go into those basic human reactions and then bring them back to the story.
You know, I just had a thought while we were speaking.
I'm glad.
Because when you...
occasion. Conversations were.
I had my monthly thought. Because earlier, Reena, you had mentioned female gaze for the wedding and then feeling like the last 2 episodes were more of... Jack Randall's kind of ownership, which would be a little more of the male gaze. I'm actually thinking, like, now that I'm analyzing the last 2 episodes further, I actually wonder if those last 2 episodes were also from the female gaze.
Well, episode 16 was, I believe, like, a combination, but Jamie's recollection of the event.
I'm thinking even more so the torture, like, and I'm wondering if that's part of the reason I felt so affected by it. There are moments that specifically what I'm thinking of is like when he is intentionally trying to let me back up. The last thing Jamie is holding on to in those moments is clearly like Claire and the thought of Claire. And Jack Randall uses that.
Ugh, yeah, she shouldn't
to take that away from him.
She made it all worse.
Right? And I think as I'm watching it as a woman, I'm thinking about how devastating that is or would be, like, for someone to try and take me away as that person's salvation, right? And, like, that's so...
That's a good point, yeah.
I'm just, like, the more I'm thinking about it, in the same way, like, the nurturing of Jamie, like, the moments of nurturing, which was calculated within the torture... That was so, like, upsetting to me. And again, like, I just wonder if now I'm having, like, a whole... I'm doing
an epiphany.
I'm doing a 180 on the last 2 episodes, maybe. Like, I think that's so unique. And I wonder if that's why I felt so aware of, like, the psychological abuse and impact that was happening in those scenes. Because... Again, that's not always highlighted.
Right.
A lot of times it's the physical abuse only and not the psychological part, which would also be something that, as a woman, I think I identify with more, I'm more attuned to. Anyway.
Sure. Yeah, well, definitely. Absolutely. On top of that, when Randall... really, if you're talking about the psychological aspect where Jamie confuses when they finally save him and he sees Claire and he confuses her for Randall and then begins to choke her. And, like, where, like, Randall obviously knew, he's like, I'm, going to leave you with something so that, like, yes, you can't be intimate with Claire. Your romantic relationship, that, your bond now is, you're going to think of me. Like, I've infiltrated. And because Randall wasn't, which, again, this is not, when we say male, female, it's not, like, rough, gentle, this, that, because what is that really? What are those definitions in Sablet? But I'm just saying that, like, he was soothing like a woman. That's not,
Well, I think you bring up a good point that it's just, like, especially with how much progress has been made, truly, in both stage and film as far as direction and being inclusive of your entire audience. Like, what really was the male gaze? And I think it really comes down, for me, the male gaze is it's disembodied. It is that's like, no person opens their door to a pizza guy and like, yeah, like there's no how, there's no why. You don't watch these actors and think like they're in love. They have a connection. They are just physically integrating themselves, so it's like if that we're going to associate with the male gaze, then yeah, all of these episodes are from a female, more universal gaze because they're inclusive of the how and the why. Yeah. Because of it's not just there. Like I would say if Jamie was there and Randall like within 2 seconds just like started the rape, totally that would have taken all of the audience out because that is not justified. It's disembodied from all of the groundwork you were laying. So what I think they're doing and what is a terrible life lesson is like the traumatic things, they're hard to digest, but it's just like, I can see it. I can see it. This is a part of it. And it like, I was thinking back to what you said that like, I distrusted the show because everything kept kind of getting bad, but then it would resolve. Mm-hmm. But it's like, isn't that life though? That every time you think you like, you skate by it, like the big truck goes by.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah. And it's
also the patience that you have to have with the show. Oh, and those episodes also, like, especially for season 1 being the longest season, when they have talking about like Mother Nature, we were saying like the woman's, it's like a universal perspective or whatever, but like naturally things breathe, things take time, and you don't rush into shit. Change. This is going with the motions. This is what's happening.
Straight up.
So there is absolute like respect and appreciation for the lengths the show did go to, how deep their characters are. Like, I don't think I've been this invested in it. The fact that I'm rewatching it. Let's put it like that, because I do not rewatch shows. I don't. Once I do it, I'm like, it's done. You're in the past. I have so many more to move on to. Yes. But this one where you're just like, oh, wait a minute. Let's unpack it.
Right. It shows good writing to me because it's just like, I'm with you. It's like, okay, I had my experience, but then going back and rewatching stuff, I'm like, I didn't see that. But to your point, it's because like maybe the show hasn't changed, but I have.
Yes.
And like you could watch something that you watched a year ago, 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago, and you might see something new. Yes. And that's always a sign to me of really good writing. And something you want to see. I love that you said that, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, to go kind of off topic, but not, it's like, women in general, like, our whole lives are kind of put in this societal specter of, like, freezing at success. Like, at your youngest, at your most successful, at your most beautiful. But to your point, it's like, life in general is change. The only way to preserve yourself at your most beautiful, at your most successful, is to die. Die at your most beautiful, your
go
most
out on a high note.
Right? I'm out. But that's the only way to preserve it. Like, that is
We're not on this show, we're not condoning anything.
Don't preserve yourself at all. Decay.
There you get to die old, live your whole life to the fullest.
Live your whole character arc. But it's true, and it's such a weird thing to grapple with, that it's just like, everything that happens to you is supposed to, and it's supposed to, you're taking it. That's what life is. And the fact that you can take it and it doesn't stop there is the best part of it.
Well, this has been a fabulous discussion.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you guys for having me. Before we wrap up, please plug anything you've got going on.
I'm in a movie. I'm in a movie called Tapawingo, coming out probably early 2022. Yes. Take a look out. I play a gorgeous wrestler.
Yes. Look for that French maid costume.
I didn't get to talk about the lucid body much, but once again, look into the lucid body. It's a book by Faith Simpson. She also teaches classes in New York City. And Staging Sex by Chelsea Pace, which is my intimacy coordinator Bible.
Where can people find you or your art? Where to watch the movie? Or
EmilyRellis.com.
Yes! All right, Emily, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you all for listening. Next up will be season 2.